Hello and welcome to Earthcast, a platform for discussions about bridging the resource gap between people and planet. I am Olivia Taylor, or Olivia Earth on the socials, your host, and I will be interviewing a series of change makers, thinkers and disruptors, and asking them about their areas of expertise. Together, we will discover fresh perspectives and the most useful levers in society for change. The main question that we will explore is how are trade-offs made between people, planet and profit? More specifically, how do we solve wicked problems and make decisions at the margin? If you would like to hear more from Earthcast, subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Welcome back to another Earthcast episode. Today, I'm speaking to Faine Loubser, who is a filmmaker and environmental storyteller working for Sea Change Project in Cape Town. We've actually once met in person, or rather, I saw Faine underwater one day diving. I was at a spot called Windmill Beach in False Bay, and the conditions were wild. I was freezing in my 5mm wetsuit, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone, a crazy person, swimming in just a costume with no wetsuit. I can't remember exactly what the temperature was on that day, but it was probably somewhere between 9 and 15 degrees Celsius, which is freezing. And that is how I was introduced to Faine's work, and I've pretty much been fangirling ever since. So for Faine, after completing her degree at Cape Town and majoring in film production, she then travelled around the world for a little bit with Ocean Film Festival with her documentary called Scarlet's Tale, which tells the story of a bond between a man and Scarlet, a 4.6-meter great white shark that took his leg. So, Faine, at Sea Change, you often talk about the Great African Sea Forest. What exactly is this? I'd really love you to describe it in your own words, and why does it need protecting?
Sure. Hey, Olivia, thanks so much for the nice intro. I actually didn't travel all around the world. My film traveled around the world. Sadly, not me. But back to the Great African Sea Forest. So quite simply, it's the name that Sea Change Project, the organization that I've been working for, has given to the kelp forest ecosystem that can be found along our coastline. It stretches from Namibia all the way to De Hoop, and it's about 1,000 kilometers long. And essentially our idea around giving it the name the Great African Sea Forest was to provide it with an identity. I mean, everyone knows of the Great Barrier Reef or the Amazon rainforest or the Serengeti. And so names have this, I guess, this power that can draw people in, that can raise its awareness. And I guess that was kind of our idea with, trying to make it a global icon, really. And from that, I think people can become connected to it, and the idea of protecting it becomes something easier.
I really like that idea of making something more tangible by giving it a name. I mean, the power of a name is so important. So yeah, thank you for explaining that. And maybe further, Faine, how long have you been diving in the Great African Sea Forest?
So, I mean, it's hard to put a kind of time to that. I think since I was a small child, but it's been on and off. Probably in the past 5 years is really when my sort of intensive diving began in the kelp forest, yeah.
I've only recently been introduced to the kelp forest, so I'm rather jealous that you've had all this experience. But I guess my experience growing up in Durban was of a much warmer tropical ocean, and coming down here to get used to or acquainted with the cold has been quite a challenge. But further, I want to ask you more about the Sea Change Project. So this is a quote from your website. Through our work, we have started a movement of emotional ecology, where people feel a meaningful connection to wild places and the animals that live in them. So can you explain your understanding of emotional ecology and perhaps how it guides your work and what it means to you? And then maybe explain a little bit more of what your work is.
For me, and I guess everyone in Sea Change, emotional ecology kind of has a different meaning for everyone, depending on their personal relationship with it. But for me, it's really about essentially connecting to nature and realizing one's interconnectedness with nature and then experiencing all of that on an emotional level. So this idea of spending time developing a relationship with the natural world, and in developing that, one fosters a sort of a deep care and love for that environment. I think we all like to think of ourselves as super rational beings, but for the most part, our actions are really strongly driven by underlying emotional responses. So when it comes to acting on, key sort of environmental concerns like needing to protect wild spaces, we can all see that as being important, but to actually feel that and then be able to make and initiate behavioral changes, it becomes far easier if you have that emotional connection to it. And then how that relates back to, I guess, sea changes work is really that, I suppose, in understanding that, we see the power of storytelling as incredibly useful as a tool to drive emotional connection. Yeah, I think a well-told story with science and fact embedded into it has huge power to be able to shift and grow people's awareness and change people's behavior, to inspire awe and action.
I think it's so useful that you mentioned storytelling, because it's such an African way of communicating, and especially, useful considering that we're talking about the great African sea forest. So I think it's a lovely way to kind of give tribute to the space that we're talking about.
Storytelling is, it's African, but I think it's a kind of a universal quality or value that we just have as humans. Storytelling is kind of an intrinsic thing to humanity.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing. And Faine, I want to know now, what are some of the biggest issues that are keeping you up at night, given your background and your context in Cape Town and in the ocean? And what are some of the solutions that you're toying with? Whether these are just dreams that you have or actual things on the ground.
It's a really big question, to be honest. If I had to go into it, there'd probably be two main things that I really struggle with at the moment. The first one being how the question of conservation and environmental justice work together with social justice. For me, this is kind of relevant to the entire world, but I think is specifically pertinent to South Africa, where we have such an extreme history of segregation and poverty and inequality. So I think that's kind of one of the key questions for me is how does one talk about saving and protecting wild spaces while at the same time recognizing the social justice issues that we face in South Africa, and realize that actually in order to be able to protect the environment and to move towards environmental justice, we have to at the same time uplift people and work towards social justice. For me, going into that question is just totally just mind-bending, and I actually don't know how to solve that. I think this amazing thing with South Africa is so we speak of, there's this concept of Ubuntu, which if one goes into and actually researches, most people will see it as the concept of I am because we are. But to go deep into that concept, what it actually referred to was not just I am because we are, but I am because we are, and because the environment is, and because. So everything is totally interlinked and is something that was understood by our ancestors. And I think that for me, the idea is that there has to be a holistic approach to environmental justice and social justice. And I guess the closest that I can come to that in terms of my response to that is to just work on it from my individual capacity. So however that is, whether it's interacting with people, connecting with people, trying to uplift people that are directly in my sort of social sphere, that's what I'm going to try to do. And I think along with this, we've been working on an exhibition, and sort of some of the ideas that we've been going into have been around how South Africa has been this place of hope for reconciliation of black and white, but that we also need to make it a space for the hope of reconciliation between man and nature, and in sort of every sort of facet.
And I think that that kind of approach is going to have to be taken by many different people in multidisciplinary areas, including where you are in filmmaking, you know, in medicine, in technology. We're all going to have to work together in this sort of Ukamian way and this with these multifaceted approaches. So thanks again for bringing this up. But Faine, you know, what do you think continues to keep people disconnected from the ocean today? You know, again, we spoke about this earlier on a different discussion, and I was saying for me it was fear of water, but for a lot of people who are not as privileged as I am, what keeps them away is not only fear, but it's access.
Yeah.
You know, how can we remedy this? I'd love to know what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, as you mentioned there, I guess there's so many layers to what keeps people from entering the sea. And specifically in South Africa, obviously you mentioned, you know, on one level there's fear, and in that there's, you know, several different reasons. I mean, for some people it's, you know, past experiences, near drowning incident, but then they're like super valid reasons. I mean, the sea is super rough, there are dangerous rips, the water's super cold. Well, for here in Cape Town, and they're big animals like white sharks and stingrays. So I think, I mean, those are kind of more the physical elements to what would keep people out of the water. But then, as you mentioned at the end, the sort of deeper than that would be the lack of access to the environment, and you know that comes down to a historical lack of access in the past. I saw this one graphic a while ago showing how beach access was restricted around Cape Town, and this is specifically during apartheid. And I think there were maybe 2 super distant, like far away beaches that Black people were allowed to go to, but for the most part it was all good beaches to white people, and most beaches to white people, and then like a few beaches to colored people, and then, yeah, as I mentioned, like I think it was like 2 beaches that Black people were allowed to go to. So I think from that there have been sort of deep wounds related to that, and then there's an aspect of like financial barriers. So even just getting to the sea becomes difficult. Along with that, I mean, you kind of need to know how to be able to swim to be able to get into the sea. Otherwise, that becomes a barrier. So there's so many different things that would prevent people, and specifically people of color in South Africa, from accessing it. And in terms of how one changes this, I think there's so many people doing incredible work in this sort of environment. Just some of the organizations that I can name on, you know, off the top of my head are projects like the 9 Miles project, and then See the Bigger Picture. So these are all kind of organizations that are working with kids in underprivileged communities and actually taking them to the sea and teaching them about the marine life, and teaching them how to swim, and teaching them how to be comfortable in water. Another good one is Sentinel Ocean Alliance, which is with Frank Solomon, who's a big wave surfer here in Cape Town. And he has committed to trying to teach every single child from Imizamietu how to swim, which is just like an incredible, incredible thing. And it's from that you start to break this chain of lack of access, hopefully.
Thank you. And again, Faine, this is such a big question to unpack, and I really appreciate the way that you've tackled this. But what you're talking about is structural racism and structural violence that are built into the system. And for those examples, I am aware of See the Bigger Picture's work, and I'm really, really inspired by what they do. So thank you for mentioning those. So Faine, I want to move on. I want to talk about content creation for change. This is where you've been involved. This is actually how I was able to connect with you, which is so cool. And I want to talk about the power of social media at this time. But I want to know, from you personally, you've worked in filmmaking, you studied it. How can we keep media independent and authentic? You know, people need to be able to trust the media. Where are the trade-offs being made in media with regards to genuine storytelling and capitulating to binding sponsorships, for example?
It's also another difficult question.
Good luck, Faine. Good luck.
Well, I think I can start with just Sea Change Project as an example, because I think I can speak to how we've dealt with those issues. I mean, for us, our core sort of focus is on media advocacy. So every sort of partnership and sponsorship, because we're a non-profit, so all of our funding comes from, you know, either corporate or philanthropic partners. So in the process of doing that, we have been extremely strategic with our partnerships, never ever compromising on our ideals, and I think that's been super important. So for us, it's really about making sure that when we partner with someone, that they align with our values and with wanting to keep us independent and with wanting to keep us telling our authentic stories. So yeah, I think that's kind of been key for us. In terms of general media, I mean, I think in South Africa, we're kind of fortunate to have a fourth estate or media that is reasonably strong and well functioning. I mean, obviously there are a couple of media organizations that are a bit dodgy, but for the most part, I think we do have very strong journalism and independent media.
Thank you for that. And I think then maybe I want to quickly go to something else before I get to the next question, but I know that you've produced films and worked with Youth Congress in Durban, and maybe you could talk a little bit about their work as well, given authentic and independent media.
Sure. So I'm actually really glad you've mentioned them. So NEWF is, which is the Nature Environment Wildlife Film Congress, like a group of incredible people who have basically set up an environment geared towards upskilling South Africans and Africans to tell conservation stories. And I mean, partly they do this through their congress, which they usually hold once a year, but then have also specifically focused on making the most incredible media labs. And they've just launched one recently, I think yesterday, which is focused on giving women, and South African women, the opportunity to develop their underwater and ocean conservation stories and skills. They are super critical and very aware of the need for diversity within ocean conservation sphere and filmmaking sphere, basically pioneering this sort of area.
And Faine, further, how would you see then your role evolving over time as a communicator?
I'd love to continue to upskill myself and to widen my sphere of being able to tell conservation stories through a variety of different media. I mean, not just filmmaking, but in writing and through photography, through exhibitions. So it's partly in upskilling myself, but I think also in maintaining and always staying true to being authentic. And yeah, I guess that would be probably my main thing, is to make sure that I'm telling authentic stories and stories that really get to the heart of my love for nature and for wanting to convey that and to share those messages around that.
I can't wait to see what you produce in the future. So I want to know then, are there grey areas in filming wild animals with regards to keeping an ethical distance, or is it very black and white?
I feel like even the question's a grey question, because I would definitely say that there are two answers to this. I think it needs to be black and white when someone enters an environment with very little knowledge. Because if you don't know the environment and you don't know the animals that you're working or are seeing, and then it becomes very dangerous to get close to animals, to make sure that one's being respectful of the environment. When you've spent a lot of time in an environment and you've developed an understanding of how animals move, of what their body language is, then it becomes a kind of intuitive process of knowing what to do and how to respond. For the most part, these wild animals are not going to let you in unless they want to. So I'll take the example of like a spotted gully shark. So these sharks are super shy, super elusive. At the slightest movement or kind of bump of a camera or bumping kelp or dropping something, they just dart off, and they're super fast. But if one knows these animals and spends a lot of time with them and knows how to move, then you can drop down into that environment, stay super still, have your camera recording, and these sharks will start coming past you, bumping into your camera, brushing your body, and you can have the most incredible encounters and get the most incredible footage. But you would only know to do that if you'd spent a lot of time with them, if you knew how to move properly, if you knew where they were. So I definitely think there are grey areas, and then there are black and white areas as well. I would never want people who don't understand the environment to just get right next to an animal and film them or whatever, interact with them, because I think that is dangerous. But I think in the case where someone has built up a substantial knowledge and understanding and also respect, it becomes a different kind of scenario.
That's a really, really beautiful answer. And I love how you've put that, because, you know, as you said it, I agree with you. It should be black and white when you don't know the area. But once you've spent time sitting and observing and learning and, you know, letting nature teach you, you take your lead from nature, and it'll tell you when to come in and when you can engage. So I really like your answer to that. Thank you. I want to know, who have you met or worked with or interviewed, you know, that is particularly interesting ideas in your industry? You know, who should maybe I be aware of? Who should the listeners be aware of that's doing some cool things?
I think for starters, this is the head of NUF, Noel and Pragner. They are incredible people to be in touch with and just have incredible ideas and are doing amazing work in this sort of filmmaking conservation industry. Then, I mean, the people that I work with at Sea Change, I think every single person that I work with has something different to offer and something, you know, incredible depth and understanding of the environment, but from totally different spaces and understandings. So it's been amazing for me to be able to work with everyone at Sea Change. Beyond that, I mean, the sort of ocean conservation filmmaking space it really is filled with the most incredible people. Off the top of my head, I think people like Shamir from See the Big Picture, Marika Masson from Two Oceans Aquarium.
Faine, thank you so much. I mean, really, the people that you've mentioned. But, you know, Faine, before I ask you the last question, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here and talking to me, especially about some really difficult issues. And I'd also like to say thank you again for highlighting that I am asking my interviewees to really bare their soul in some instances. So thank you. Before we go, I just want to say, if you guys would like to follow more of Faine's work, please follow her on Instagram at Faine Pearl, Faine Pearl. And you can see some of the beautiful things that she is doing there. And so, Faine, last question, your favorite, I know. Given your expertise, what question should I have asked you?
Oh my word. I've been having like sleepless nights about this question, genuinely, because I haven't known
Oh my goodness.
Okay, not quite sleepless, but I think given sort of my background from content creation perspective, especially in the realm of social media, I think there are important questions to raise around content creation in a social media sphere. So how one navigates the crazy sort of mass media constant stream of images and video, and where one can create a space, or whether it's even possible to create a space that's really truly meaningful and hopeful to people. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to phrase that necessarily as a question, but it's thinking about how to avoid, I guess, the fast food kind of nature of social media, that's kind of the feeling that I have around social media in general.
Thank you for joining me today at Earthcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Let's chat next episode, where I will be asking more creatives and intellectual disruptors about making decisions at the margin. See you next time.